we talked a lot about convincing stakeholders or leads or kind of other people of influence. Irene has been in those places, right? And I know she's worked her way to positions of leadership in a lot of amazing organizations. So I will, without oversharing, I think I'll go ahead and let Irene give a more detailed introduction, but we're super fortunate to have Irene. I'll pass it over to you.
Yep. Okay. Fantastic. I'm going to talk today about what you don't learn in school about being a UX designer. I understand that many of you are majoring in cognitive science or computer science. Maybe you have aspirations to pursue a career as a designer, or you may be looking to become a software engineer or product manager, or work in tech in general. I think all of the advice that I have to give, while a lot of it is very specific to the role of a UX designer, it is applicable in general in terms of how to be effective in an organization and how to work with other people. So hopefully you'll find this relevant and interesting. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself first to give you some context. So I studied electrical computer engineering at the University of South Carolina as an undergrad, mostly because I grew up loving science and math. I had a personal computer from the age of 10, and I learned how to code very early on. I was the only girl in my computer science class, and even as an electrical and computer engineering major, there were very few girls in my class. So it was an interesting experience unto itself, but I always felt like a fish out of water. I also grew up in South Carolina. So as a Chinese girl in South Carolina, it was also a very, very different kind of experience because I was very unlike everybody else. I often joke that my experience growing up as a small Asian girl in South Carolina fully helped prepare me to become a designer and a woman working in tech, because I was kind of used to being like nobody else. Following my undergraduate degree, I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, originally with the intention of pursuing electrical and computer engineering in graduate school. At the time, I thought I was going to focus on VLSI chip design, but I quickly learned that the exciting challenges of the day were really in software and not in hardware. And that also, whereas all the classmates around me, it felt like they were just building technology for the sake of technology. I was more interested in the relationship between technology and human beings. How do you invent and design technology so that it's useful for people? And what's the impact that technology has on society? And at the time, there really wasn't like a formal way to study that. But I just stumbled upon this textbook called Engineering Psychology and Human Factors. And the guy who wrote the textbook literally was a professor at the University of Illinois. And that just opened my eyes to this whole world of engineering psychology, where using the principles of human perception, cognition, behavior, motivations, things like that, you can apply that towards the design of technology like cockpits, airplane cockpits, so that you can reduce pilot error. And so back then, there was no such thing as human-computer interaction as a field of study. So I sort of just cobbled together my own degree of study, pulling together courses from psychology, computer science, and industrial engineering. I began my career at Netscape, which was the world's first commercial web browser. I was an interaction designer where I worked on the design of the browser, the mail and news client, the calendar, the page editor, things like that. Then I joined Yahoo as employee number 505 in 1998. And they were looking for someone with my background to help them build products and services that were easy to learn, easy to use, and useful for people. So they were specifically looking for someone with my background, even though it was very uncommon at the time. I built Yahoo's first usability labs, as well as their human-centered design organization, and eventually became vice president of design and user experience at Yahoo, and I led that for 8 years. And those were interesting times because it spanned the first dot-com boom, followed by the bust in the early 2000s, and then the rebirth. So that dot-com bust, the first dot-com bust was probably while you guys were born. And then in 2006, I went to Google to run the design team at Google. So similar to the job I had at Yahoo, but in a very different kind of cultural context, because Google is famously engineering driven, and there were 60 designers, 40 user researchers, and no manager. So I had like 100 direct reports when I first joined, and I had to write performance reviews for all these people within the first 3 months of joining Google. But what I'm most proud of doing at Google is, like at Yahoo, I learned how to design at scale. At Google, I really learned how to run an organization, in an environment where there were never going to be enough designers to cover all of the engineering projects that were going on at Google. So it forced me to be a better manager and a better leader. In 2012, when Larry Page became CEO of Google, he decided to decentralize all the organizations. And so rather than have one monolithic design team, one monolithic engineering team, and one monolithic product management team, everybody was decentralized into different product areas. And so I stayed on for an extra year, just kind of in this emeritus role, but eventually left Google and joined a startup called Udacity, which was just 2 blocks from my house and founded by Sebastian Thrun. And the promise was to we were going to disrupt higher education and democratize higher education and figure out how to bring online learning to the world. And I started experimenting with what it might be like to be a designer in venture capital. So I was also an entrepreneur in residence at a venture capital firm called Trinity Ventures. So that was interesting, kind of being part of a small 20-person startup, coming up with product market fit and raising money. At the same time, I was also working with venture capitalists to review deals and vet them. And once we figured out product market fit, which user research played a pivotal role in this process, I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. I decided to leave, and 3 weeks later, Vinod Khosla called me, and he had tried to recruit me away from Google when I was leaving, but I decided that venture capital was not very friendly to women back in 2012, so I turned it down at the time. But 2 years later, he called me again, and he said, "Now are you ready to come?" And I decided I was. So I've been at Khosla Ventures as an operating partner since 2014, and my role is to work with CEOs to help them be successful. So I coach and advise CEOs as well as the designers that work for those companies. So I basically get paid to give advice now, which is really awesome. And just as a side note, I also have taught yoga for the last 10 years. I have 2 daughters. My older daughter's a junior at Carnegie Mellon studying cognitive science. Younger daughter is going to be a freshman at Berkeley this fall studying integrative biology. And I have 2 dogs, which are basically my replacement children. So that's a little bit about me and the context about me. And so what I want to share with you today is a couple of things. First is about landing a job as a UX designer, and then how to be successful as one. And what I found in my own experience, and also in those that I have hired and mentored and trained, is that like in school, you learn all these hard skills. Like you learn about design process, you learn how to do user research, you learn how to prototype and iterate, and hopefully you'll learn you learn about design principles like Fitts Law and things like that. But the soft skills, most people just learn along the way after they've made a lot of mistakes or are unsuccessful. And so I think a lot of this is kind of like knowledge that maybe you earn over time instead of learning from a textbook. But if you take away, if you even only take away 10% of what I have to say today and really internalize it, you will be well on your way towards success. So I want to talk first about how to stand out as a candidate, because whether you're looking for an internship or a full-time job in the tech industry as a designer or some other role, like this, I just want to give you a window into what that process is like. And then from an employer's point of view, how we think about candidates that we talk to and how we evaluate them. So like at Yahoo, I built the user experience and design team from scratch. I was person number 1. At the time that I left, I had about 250 people reporting to me. In order to hire those 250 people, I probably interviewed, over 1,000 people. And then similarly at Google, lots of people. So I had seen and talked to a lot of people and rejected a lot of people. I've hired a lot of people. I'll tell you, number one, your connection. So Jesse was telling me that one of the top questions is like how to get noticed, like how to get your foot in the door so that they even look at your resume and think about talking to you as a candidate. I had a geometry teacher in ninth grade who used to tell us, use all possible resources. And that there's no other context where this could be more true than in the context of looking for a job. So I know that Berkeley has a career center. And as an employer, when I was looking to hire new college grads, I actively advertised at these university career centers. And Berkeley was one of those schools. There are job boards that you can post to, but also it requires you to kind of scour and scrape those job boards. Like at Coastal Ventures, if you look on our website, there is actually a link that points to career opportunities. And so that is often includes like almost all of the positions that are available within our portfolio companies. Proportionately, of course, there are fewer positions available for designers than there are for like engineers, but you can find those. So it does take some active work on your part to find them. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, make sure you have one, because there are recruiters whose full-time job is to look at LinkedIn and come up with spreadsheets of people that potentially fit the requirements that the employers are looking for. And so, weak connections, like working through your professors, guest lecturers, whoever you interact with. My internship at IBM when I was a college student, I landed through like the mother of a friend of mine that I had befriended online. And this was back in 1994 when there was barely an internet. It was like over Usenet News. I met this guy on some internet chat group about The Cure or something, because we're both Cure fans. And then his mother worked at IBM and she forwarded my resume to the hiring manager. That's how I got my job, so this is how it happens. There's no shame in working through any kind of connections that you can get. The portfolio is really what gets you the phone interview. So there's the resume and then there's the portfolio. And I would say most of the time, hiring managers are deciding who to talk to based on the portfolio that they see. And in subsequent slides, I'll talk about do's and don'ts for your portfolio. You may be wondering, like, well, what should go in the portfolio? Because I've never worked anywhere before. This is where school projects are a great asset, because every project you work on in school is a candidate for your portfolio. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should include all of your projects in your portfolio, but just choose the best ones. And I'll talk about that in a minute. There's also like other things that you can do, such as like inventing projects on your own. Like you see a problem, you fix the problem. Like you can be a designer in your natural environment, and that can serve as a nice project to put in your portfolio as well. It doesn't have to be in service of some employer. This could be just like, hey, I was really curious and passionate about X, Y, and Z. And so I created this design project to further investigate that. And some of the best designers, actually all of the best designers I've ever worked with, did that because they just loved the work. They were showing up because they just loved being a designer. And you can really see that passion and curiosity and interest in the work. It shines through in the portfolio. And then the third thing to consider might be like volunteer work. So like if there are no jobs that are going to pay you, don't be afraid to kind of step up and maybe help a local small business with building a website or designing something for them. Or, there are countless nonprofits that probably would love to have some volunteer help. So you can get really creative about cultivating opportunities for yourself to showcase and exercise your design skills, even if it's in an unpaid context. And that can then potentially open doors for paid opportunities. So once you get the phone interview, that's usually a 30-minute conversation. And really what gets you to the next step after the phone interview is how well you communicate in that phone interview. Like, are you a clear thinker? Are you articulate? Are you polite? Can you talk about the problems that you are dealing with and how you address them? How do you approach your work? Really, a lot of the people on the other side of the phone, the employers on the other side of the phone, are just assessing, like, is this a potentially smart, sane, easy to work with person that I would like to have in my life. So it's really your communication skills and your energy will get you past that phone interview. And then you'll be invited for an on-site interview. And in those on-site interviews, you'll probably be asked to like show some work samples, either in one-on-one interviews or in a portfolio presentation. This is where you are going to have to demonstrate a few key things. One is process. So can you plan and execute a project? Can you articulate how you approach problem solving in a methodical, repeatable way that's hopefully focused on understanding users and solving their problems? Creativity. So creativity is really about generating a lot of ideas to solve a single problem. So not honing in on one specific solution right away, but coming up with a lot of ideas. It's sort of like kissing a lot of frogs to find the prince. And so we want to see that kind of flexible thinking. Third is like insights and inspiration. So like to what extent and how have your design decisions been inspired and informed by your understanding of users? And then there's this elusive other category around taste. Like we're looking at, is the portfolio good or not? Does it look good? Do the interaction patterns, are they really easy to understand and use? Like, are your designs any good? And we want to know if you think they're good. And if so, how do you know? And like, if you had more time, what would you do to improve? Because good designers never believe that a design is ever done. There's always more opportunity for improvement. So we want to understand, like, to what extent are you self-reflective and self-aware? And then sometimes employers will have a design exercise. That's a little controversial, and I don't want to get into that right now, which I'm happy to talk about more in the Q&A, but you may be asked to do that as well. Actually, I'm going to, what happened? Oh yeah, here's my, I'm going to talk about do's and don'ts for your portfolio. Okay. Don't show everything you've ever worked on. You only want to show the good stuff. Okay. Don't password protect your portfolio, because that is creating friction for people. And also, like, why do you need a password protection in your portfolio? Like, if you're showing confidential information because you interned at some company and you worked on a project that hasn't been released, don't do that. I have literally had people on my team who rejected candidates because they had confidential work in their portfolio. And my team members were like, if they're willing to share confidential work from this other company, what's going to stop them from sharing confidential stuff about Google if they go interview somewhere else? The other thing too, I'll say, I was an adjunct lecturer at Stanford in the product design program, and Bill Burnett, the director there, was telling me how when they review students for the graduate program, like, they will automatically reject anyone who password protects their portfolio, because again, it's like, why? It's a barrier. When you're showing your work, don't just show the final solution. Like, we want to see how you arrived at it. We want to see what was the problem, what did you start with, and then what was the journey that you took. So it's about the process and the journey as much as it is about the final result and destination. Don't take credit for work that other people did, because eventually we will find out. I did a backdoor job reference for a candidate who was interviewing with a startup that I was working with, and his portfolio looked amazing, and it showed like real depth of understanding and analysis of the whole system. And then I got a backdoor reference through a connection and talked to a colleague that he had worked with on this project. And it turns out that the colleague had done most of the heavy lifting, and he was doing mostly just the visual design on the screens. And so we rejected him. Don't expect people to spend a lot of time looking at your portfolio. Most people spend somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes looking at your portfolio. Like, they're scanning very quickly because they're going through a lot. So you want to design, you want to use your human-centered design skills to design your portfolio in a way that's easy to scan, easy to understand very quickly. So let's talk about the do's. Buy your own domain name. Don't rely on Wix with ads. Like, your own domain name probably costs $12 a year. So hopefully that's, something worth investing in and within reason, in terms of an affordable option. Show your best work. Ideally, only 3 projects, three projects, I would say, would be the minimum. 5 might be a maximum, unless you have like decades of experience. But you want these projects to be pretty different from each other. You want them to showcase the range of skills that you have. So if you think about like the array of skills that are required across the whole human-centered design process, ideation, concept development, prototyping, evaluation, iteration, like maybe you have one project that's only focused on concept design. And then there's like another project where you were focused on executing, like building a prototype and executing it out and putting it in front of users. Like you can have different projects that showcase different arcs, different parts of this arc of the design process. But ideally, you want to show your range of skills. You want to show your process. I talked about that earlier. And again, don't just show the one idea that you honed in on. If you generated a lot of different sketches for solving a particular problem, show that. You don't have to go into excruciating detail for every single idea, but you want to give reviewers the understanding that you did come up with a lot of different ways to solve a single problem. And that's true whether it's like you're generating a lot of different concepts for some big need that you've identified. It also applies to like if you were trying to design an icon, and you came up with like 100 sketches for that icon. It wouldn't hurt to show that. Again, be clear about your specific contribution versus other team members. And then again, design your portfolio for scannability because people aren't spending a lot of time on that. Okay, so say like you've got the job. What happens next? Because I think a lot of people come into the job thinking like, oh, I go in, I collaborate with engineers and product managers, I come up with some mock-ups and, eventually we launch the product. And it sounds pretty straightforward, but what I have found is that there are a lot of challenges that are universal to the profession. And it can be quite frustrating, especially in early in your career before you understand that this is just, it comes with the job and that there are soft skills that you need to learn to be successful in this kind of environment. Because the truth is that designers are part of a team and rarely the decision maker. Rarely are they the ones who say, this is the thing that we're going to launch with. Sometimes you are. And I would say like, if you intend to begin your career as an engineer or as a product manager, even hearing this information will help you be an effective collaborator with designers so that the whole team can be successful. So let's talk about common challenges. And I've seen this. I work with a lot of companies. I have lived this myself. So this is universally true. The first is that everyone is a designer, even if they're not designers, even if their job title doesn't have the word designer in them. Everyone has an opinion. And there are a lot of ideas to wrangle. And so it can be a little bit, it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. And then, what happens if like, some executive who has more power or authority than you has some idea that's very different from yours? How do you deal with that? So this is one challenge. What if these people have like, ideas that are not really, that don't serve the user that well? How do you navigate that? Another common challenge is around people talking a lot about what they think the design should be, what that experience should be. There's a lot of talking. There's some cultures that are even very deliberately text-based, like Amazon is famously text-based. Google is another example where there's a lot of words that are used to describe what is going to be built. I experienced this firsthand at Udacity. It's like the story of like the blind man touching different parts of the elephant, where like one man's saying, oh, I'm touching a snake. And another man says like, oh, I'm touching a tree trunk. And another, like they all have different perspectives, even though they're all interacting with the same thing. And so what I find is that having the team talk about the product, they think they have the same shared understanding of what the experience is going to be, when in reality, what everybody is imagining can be very different. And so like, how do you bring truth to that is a big question. Third common challenge is around decision-making process. Like I said, a lot of times the designer is not the decider. And that can be really tricky because you're designing things, but then, if you're presenting multiple options and then somebody chooses some path that you don't think is the best one, or maybe they're suggesting something entirely different than what you've come up with in the first place, how do you go forward with that? A couple of decades ago, when this profession was still relatively new, I had an acquaintance who worked at another tech company who was so he was so put off by all these opinions that he would tell engineers like, "Well, I don't tell you how to code, so you shouldn't tell me how to design." And I will tell you that will get you nowhere. But there has to be, or there are more effective ways to be collaborative and still get your own way with stakeholders. So we'll talk about that too. Another classic problem is too many projects, not enough time. There will never, ever, ever be a situation where there are enough designers in an organization to cover all the projects. Maybe there will be enough engineers to cover all the projects, because that seems to be the biggest limiting factor for most organizations. But there will never be enough designers. Rarely. I've actually never seen it. And if you do see a company that has too many designers on their hands, that is a bad sign. Like, to me, that is a sign that I should not be investing in a company. And it might sound a bit heretical for me to say that, coming from my background as someone who believes passionately in design and its importance and its role in a company's success. But at some point when there are too many designers, then it's a sign of imbalance in the company, which I can get into later, but it's not really relevant to this. But there's this classic example of, like, designers being spread too thin across multiple projects, which we call the peanut butter phenomenon. It's like spread too thin. Another common challenge is like designers being brought in too late into a project. Like, maybe an engineer has come up with a prototype for something and they want to launch it, but they are told that they need to work with a designer before they can launch it, before it can see the light of day. And so basically, as a designer, you're just asked to kind of pretty it up. And we call that putting lipstick on a pig. What happens when you have lipstick on a pig? It's still a pig. So, ideally, designers would get involved as early as possible upfront, collaborating early on with the concept all the way through execution. A lot of the times that doesn't happen. So how do you deal with that? Lack of user research. Companies saying, we don't need user research, or we don't have time for user research, or we don't have the budget for user research. I actually had a CEO say to me, we're serving enterprise customers and they're expecting us to have all the answers, so we don't want to look like we don't know what we're doing by doing user research. I was like, wow. That is really something. As a designer, you're designing in the dark if you don't have insights into your users. So you need to think about this as part of your job and not as some resource that you don't have access to. Okay, so those are some common challenges that are universal to every company, every UX designer, regardless of any organization or who your boss is. So what do you do? Okay. And this is where it's like, okay. First, in terms of dealing with everyone having an opinion about design, embrace the ideas and opinions, welcome it. So even though you're the designer, you need to invite and facilitate ideation and discussion with the team. And I think the designers who see themselves as not only the people who are bringing ideas to life, but also facilitating and making the design process as inclusive as possible, they're the ones who are the most successful, because what you're effectively doing is buy-in. When people feel like the idea is coming from them, they are going to be more invested in ensuring the success of that idea. So cat herding is like a big part of the job. And that can be especially challenging for like a new grad fresh out of school or somebody pretty early in their career to herd the cats, because you don't have like the gravitas or the experience or the authority. So the best thing I can tell you is like learn how to run design sprints. I don't know how much you guys have participated in one or engaged in some kind of design sprint uh, activity. Um, they have been referred to over the past 20 years under different names, and I think design sprint is something that's more commonly known in the industry now. And the origin of that came from my team at Google, because um, we knew we were outnumbered as designers. We were outnumbered by engineers. Larry Page specifically managed that ratio of engineers to everybody else. So he was actively making sure that there would be an imbalance and that engineers would run the company. So we had to figure out how to make design successful within an engineering-driven organization, where the engineers would build an empathetic understanding of their users, and would be active participants in coming up with the concepts for solving these problems. Our goal was to really teach everybody in the company how to think like a designer. And so we developed what eventually became design sprints. Um, Jake Knapp and Braden Kowitz, John Zarasky, they all worked in my organization. And this was something that I commissioned them to do. Jake was especially interested in process. So we had cultivated this idea of design sprints over time, and he further refined it, and then eventually wrote a book, and now there's blog posts and et cetera, et cetera. So probably the best thing you can do is to buy that book called Sprint. Yeah, it's called Sprint. And that is like a playbook for how to run a design sprint. And this is a nice structured way to facilitate bringing people together up front to build an empathetic understanding of users, to ideate, to diverge, to dot vote and converge, and then to prototype. And everybody is an active participant, not just the designers. So that is a skill, that's a hard skill that you can learn. Wrangling that and refereeing people so that when bad actors like speak up and say, that's a terrible idea, you have to shoot that down as a facilitator, that sort of thing. Those are soft skills that you learn over time. Hopefully you see other people who model the behaviors that you can learn that. But in terms of like concrete, tangible things to manage this challenge around the idea that everybody's a designer is a very important thing to learn. Okay, the other thing is prototype and make vision tangible. Like, at the more strategic levels of product management and design, there is a lot of overlap to the point where a lot of people wonder, like, what's the point of having a UX designer if you have what's the point of having like a director of UX design if you have a director of product management? Because they're basically both thinking about target audience and, what their needs are and what the product strategy should be and, blah, blah, blah. I always tell designers, like, the superpower that you have that makes you unique that no one else has is that you make vision tangible. So you need to remember that that is your role, and that is the value add that you can bring, whether it is like high fidelity mockups to help stakeholders figure out, like, should it be this color or that color? Should it be rounded corners or slanted corners? All the way up to like, what should the solution be to solve, what should, the high level concept be in order to solve this problem. And that can be a low fidelity mockup. It could be a sketch. But to the extent that you can help make vision tangible to help stakeholders make informed decisions, that is going to be the value add that you bring to the team. It's always helpful to show multiple options. And I would say no more than 3, but at least show 2. So somewhere between 2 and 3, they should be good enough so that you would be willing to live with any of them. And each of the options kind of pivots on a particular design principle. So like, when we were designing Google Maps, we had concepts where it was like, okay, here is a concept that pivots primarily on people. So it's a very social experience. And then here's a concept that pivots primarily on the concept of place. I'm just making this up, but you can imagine like these kinds of maps or location-based services would be entirely different depending on what the whole big idea is, what the concept is. And this is true all the way down to more granular design problems. So, and by pivoting on a particular concept or principle or value, that also is a way for you to have language to justify and defend a particular design direction. You could say, well, this one values efficiency of use, whereas this other concept values ease of learning, and you can imagine that any interface that optimizes for ease of learning is going to be really different than a design that optimizes for efficient learning, right? So those are just some examples. This was actually, we just said this. So as a companion to the multiple alternatives, you want to always articulate and justify your design based on what you're optimizing for. So what are the trade-offs? What are the values and principles that dictate one direction over another? Okay. Use the appropriate level of fidelity of prototyping to get the answers you need. I have worked with a lot of designers who will jump straight to high fidelity mockups because that seems to be where they're most comfortable. Some designers will say, well, I feel like I need to produce high fidelity mockups because my stakeholders, that's all they can see. Like they just don't understand how to look at a wireframe. Well, the problem with that is that like if you're showing a high fidelity mockup to a stakeholder and you're trying to talk to them about like the flow, like how you're moving people through an experience, and they see this high fidelity mockup and they're just like, I don't like the sheet of purple that you used. It's very hard to have a productive conversation when they're focusing on the wrong thing. So sometimes it's helpful just to make it as rough as you need it to be in order to get a productive conversation there. And as much as stakeholders will say like, oh, I need to see a high fidelity mockup, this is an expectation that you have to manage because you're helping to walk them through and you're forcing the decision making at the level that is required, at the level of fidelity that is required for the level of decision that is being demanded. So the more conceptual the decision has to be, the more rough and abstract the prototype. It could even be bubble diagrams, but then if it's like something around font choices and color choices, then of course it has to be higher fidelity. Okay. Ruthlessly prioritize and make that transparent. So this is about the concern around having too many projects and not enough time. The temptation for a lot of designers in an organization is to help everybody out because like painful to see bad design launch. And so what I see a lot of times happening is that designers will, some team that the designer's not actively working with will say, hey, can you help us out with blah, 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 just make an icon for us or just help us, do a quick cleanup or a quick audit of this thing that's about to go out. And so the designer does that because they want to help out. They don't want to say no. They don't want to be mean. They don't want to disappoint anyone or they don't want to disappoint users. And then they don't, because they were not involved early and upfront and they're spread across too many projects, they end up disappointing that team. Like the work that they do is not good. And then the work that they do on this other project that they're primarily responsible for but not being good because this designer is spread out across a lot of different things and doesn't have a lot of time to think more abstractly or more strategically about their main project. What ends up happening as a result is that everybody thinks like, well, we don't need to invest in design. We've got everything covered because this one designer is doing it all. And or what also happens is, well, we don't need to invest in design because honestly, like our design is not making that huge of a difference to our bottom line. Well, that's because the design is mediocre. Like, they don't know what they don't know. So spreading across multiple projects that you don't have a lot of time for in order to do a great job. It's better to work on a few projects and do a really great job on them than to spread your energy out across a lot of projects. Because what you want to have happen is you want people to see, wow, when you've got a designer working early and upfront, collaborating with product managers and engineers, and they've done user research and like they've really done a really awesome job, and look at this amazing thing that they built. And this needs to really stand out in comparison to the other projects that don't have design. Only then can you demonstrate the real value, the real strategic value of design and justify having more people get hired to become designers to work on these other projects that don't have support. It also serves your career better because then you're able to show the value that you've brought to the product and to the company. So do a few things really well, set yourself up for success, find a way to rationalize your priorities and make that transparent. Because the other bad thing that happens is like the designer chooses like, oh, I'm going to work on this, but not on that. And then eventually at some point, all the stakeholders get really mad because they don't understand why do these projects get resources and these projects don't get design resources. So you want to make that super transparent to everyone. Get data. So in regards to the pushback around doing user research, you need to see it as your responsibility to make sure you get the data that you need to design well. If you're making design decisions based on just guessing, like that's on you. If the design doesn't serve people, it's, I talk to a lot of designers who kind of like blame the upper management or blame the product manager for not letting them do user research. You can go out and do guerrilla research. It can be like 6 participants, whatever, but get the data that you need. Advocate for instrumenting the product so that teams can get the large scale data that they need around what users are doing. But like, a lot of times you might be working on something that hasn't launched yet, and it's very difficult to instrument something that isn't built. And then also keep in mind that quantitative research only tells you part of the story. Like if you've got a lot of people spending time on a particular feature, you don't know if that's because it's engaging or if it's because it's confusing. So qualitative research will tell you the why behind the what, and they're very complementary. But you need to be prepared to do your own user research. And those designers who are able and willing to do research to inform and inspire design decisions, they are more likely to get hired than the designers who don't. So this kind of brings me to this other point, which is like, just do it. Don't ask for permission to do user research. Better to ask for forgiveness. And very few people will slap you on the wrist for trying to understand your users. You also don't need a big budget or a user researcher whose job it is to do the user research. Like you can do it yourself. I don't know how much exposure or training you have with that in this class, but Steve Krug has a great book called, what is it called? It's like Guerrilla User Testing or something like that, which is a very easy, small read. It's a quick how-to guide for running your own user research. And I really have always advocated for the notion that user research is a design activity, because what also happens in some organizations is that people confuse user research with market research, and then they have, they pull the user researchers out of the UX team and combine with them with the marketing team and form one single research team, which then means that user research devolves into focus groups instead of observational research and things like that. So just think of qualitative user research and to some degree quantitative user research as part of the design job, the design activity. And then I've worked with a lot of researchers who, because they have PhDs in cognitive science, they feel like the research is the deliverable. Like they set up really great experimental design. They brought the participants in. They figured out whether it was a within subjects or a between subjects study, and they executed it beautifully. And they have this big report that's written, and then they think like, I should get promoted. And you just have to remember, research is a means to an end. It's not the end itself. And it's just like when you learned in Psych 101, like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And the same is true for user research. If nobody pays attention to your user research, it might as well have never happened. So you also have to figure out how to socialize and communicate the research effectively. And I have a lot of conversations with people I mentor and advise about this topic. And, there's a range of activities that you can engage in to do this. What I have seen to be the most effective is, like at Udacity, I worked with the founder to make sure that at every Friday company-wide all hands, we carved out 10 minutes of that hour for user research to get presented every single week. And sometimes there would be nothing to report on, but most of the times there would be something like, this is what we learned in the survey that we ran, or this is what we saw in user testing this week, or We got quantitative data about our users or whatever. Over time, what it does is it builds a common mind within the organization around who the users are and what their needs are and what's motivating them and what how they're behaving. And the insights that we shared could range from the highly high level. It could be, just like we came up with 40 different personas for who is using Udacity. We need to design for only 2 personas. We need to pick which 2 out of the 40 we're optimizing for. Or it could be they could be video highlights clips, interviews with real people who are saying, we pull specific quotes and we show those videos to the whole company. What ends up happening is that it becomes much easier then for the whole company to move in the same direction. And it becomes really clear what the right design should be because everybody has the same view of the user. So it solves like the blind man touching the elephant problem. So that's the best way. But of course, not every company will grant, 10 minutes of a weekly company-wide all hands to user research. So, what might be some other ways? In a company like Google, they're not going to do that, the Google company-wide all hands, but within the Google Maps team, maybe that's possible. We got research so plugged into the Google Maps team that eventually the VP of engineering mandated that engineers had to participate like a company, the UX team, and then observe usability studies or field studies every quarter. And it was part of their OKRs. So that's like another way. Using, video editing, highlights, reels, pull quotes, like anything that you can use to get the attention of others is really helpful. Make sure you communicate it well. So in summary, hard skills will get you in the door. So that's your resume, your portfolio. We're looking for people who know how to do need finding and concept generation. Do you know how to sketch, mock up, and prototype ideas? Can you evaluate designs and then iterate on those designs? Can you effectively collaborate with cross-functional team members? Take ideas from concept to execution? Can you actually launch things into the real world? Okay, so those are the hards, and those I think are all pretty much covered in your class. The soft skills are what makes you successful. This is what gets you the promotion, the good job reference, puts you in leadership positions. And it's really not about what you do, but how you do it. So cultivating empathy and, of course, communicating clearly, making the vision tangible. And again, this is the superpower that you possess as the designer on the team. Over-communicating insights from user research, making it compelling and easy to digest and consume. Know how to facilitate meetings, because as a designer, you are also the cat herder and the meeting manager. You need to manage the energy. It's sort of like being a DJ at a rave or like a yoga teacher in a room. It's like you're managing the energy in the room so that people are actively participating when it's appropriate and they're not judging when it's not appropriate, or that they are being critical when it is appropriate. And you're encouraging participatory design by getting everybody to sketch and making people feel psychologically safe to do that, and things like that. And then prioritizing and making trade-offs through values and principles. And this is true not only in your specific designs, but also in what you choose to design, how you choose to spend your time. So with that, I'm just going to leave the rest of the time for Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. I hope you found this relevant and interesting and useful.
Hi, Irene. I had a question. So you mentioned that it would be better to like buy your own domain name, and I was wondering, or like I know that some people use Notion websites for their portfolio, and I was wondering if that was all right or like not professional enough.
I have not encountered this in any portfolio that I have reviewed. So I don't know, using Notion as a portfolio, it's sort of like sticking everything in a Google Doc or, and passing that around. You know, um, I think it's not as good because it feels a little lazy, but if you're using that or if other people are using it and they're getting jobs, then good for them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask another question. You
Yeah.
mentioned about like approaching connections about internships, and I was kind of wondering like how do you know when it's appropriate? Like how close do you need to be with this person like before you ask them? Because like for example, I went to a wedding and then I was like seated with these managers, but then like as I was getting to know them, I didn't want to like just like straight up ask them for like an interview because I felt like that might be kind of inappropriate. But then I was also talking to some other friends and they said that like you should have taken that opportunity. So like I actually don't really know what to do. I was wondering what you would think.
Yeah. It's tricky because you don't want interactions with other people to feel so transactional. So the best way is really start by getting to know people on a human level, and then it becomes easier to approach them. But like I also have a friend who used to say like, don't ask, don't get. And so like, if you don't approach them, you're never going to get it. And if you do ask, all they can do is say no. So I would err on the side of asking, even if you don't feel like, oh, I didn't build the ideal relationship with that person.
Oh, thank you. Like, have you ever been like offended by this kind of interaction? Like, has anyone ever like?
No,
Oh, really?
no,
Okay.
no. I mean, like for me, like on the receiving end of this, I just feel like, oh, I can't help them right now. But I never feel offended.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, the name of the user research book I recommended. It's by Steve Krug. His last name is spelled Krug. I have it on my shelf somewhere, but I can't find it. I might have given it away actually. I lend books out a lot. Steve Krug. And if you just look like on Amazon or whatever, I'm sure you'll find it. And the other book I recommended was Sprint by Jake Knapp. I'll see if I can share the link in the chat. Yeah, Steve Krug, it's called Don't Make Me Think. That's the book. That's the book, Don't Make Me Think. So that's a real nice primer on how to run your own guerrilla user research, even if your job title is not user researcher. Any other questions?
I have another question. I don't know what else I'm gonna ask. You said that you could just like get your own user research if no one's like really looking for it. So I was wondering like how would you do that? Like would you just go up to your friend's family or like a coworker from a different division to like go through your like wireframe or something? Or like do you post surveys on platforms like Reddit or like do you mean like getting like professional like outside like sourcing it from like a different company that specializes in like
No, so like when I was at Yahoo, nobody had ever heard of, nobody's asking me to build a usability lab. Nobody was asking me to do this. What I did was I created a database of people who are interested in helping us give feedback on our products. So I worked with somebody to just stick a link on the Yahoo website that said, hey, if you're interested in giving us feedback on our products under development, click here. And it went to a form where people could fill out their contact information and some demographic information. And then whenever I wanted to run a study, I would just go into that database and pull up, people who fit the criteria that I was looking for. I offered to pay them for their time. So that did require a budget. But, sometimes you can get away with, giving people gift cards or swag or whatever, like Yahoo had a nice brand. So, and if you work for an enterprise company or B2B company, you should expect to pay people more because they are professionals. And I'll talk a little bit about recruiting for enterprise and B2B, but for consumer, it's a lot easier because like the whole world is your target audience. I brought them into the Yahoo office. And at that time, I just took over 2 adjacent conference rooms and I set up a video camera. I mean, this is before everything was wireless. I mean, now it's like super easy because there are all these tools that you can use on the internet. But I bought a video camera. and I piped the video cable through the ceiling into the next room over so that people could watch next door while I was, sitting next to a person at a computer, watching them use the Yahoo products we were developing. And so it was really that straightforward. I just literally piped a video feed next to the next conference room, and I invited people to watch. And those who didn't watch, I had a video footage that I edited to show people. Now, for enterprise and B2B, it's a little bit different because sometimes you may have to make friends with people on the sales team, because the sales organization is usually the gateway to talking to your customers. And so, like I would bring them beer and chocolate or whatever, make friends with them. Like so much of this is just like being entrepreneurial and schmoozy, but then they would be willing to pull favors from me and get me access to some of the customers, and I would go spend time with them. So same kind of thing. And to make it easy for them, I would go to their office instead of asking them to come to our office. So, I make it easy for them to help them help me.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
If I may, I do have one question that I would like to ask you. So I think your experience in the VC would be super relevant here. So you talked about how some companies you've been at, particularly I think Google, was very engineering led. And I feel like there's that still somewhat true, where it's kind of a trend of engineers, maybe wanting to protect each other, like this culture of, you don't want to be business. It's like a reaction to being led by other people who are non-technical. And then you see some of the organizations that are built by people who found companies who are engineers being very engineering, and they do like the rules that you said, okay, a certain ratio. How should designers approach this? Do you think that there will be a similar like counterpart of, okay, now we have to be design led, and designers who are founding companies, maybe, let's say even students here who have entrepreneurial aspirations, because I know a lot of them do. How should they approach that? Should they react in that way, or should it be something different? Should designers be the CEO of a company, or should they be founders and like that? Or how should people react to this type of thing?
I mean, anybody who wants to invite that into their lives can be an entrepreneur, regardless of what kind of background you have. I think designers are really well equipped, well suited to do that, because they see the market need and the opportunity, and they have the skills to bring ideas to life, which is really helpful for raising money from investors and things like that. I think sitting on an investing team, we're also looking at can this person build a great team? Can they attract and hire really awesome engineers to execute, things like that. And that's true for any CEO. We're always looking at any CEO candidate as can they build a great team? Because no single person can do it alone. In terms of, whether a company is engineering led or design led, like that, a lot of times fundamentally depends on what is the competitive perspective for that organization. So Yahoo and Google on paper look like they're the same kind of company. Both companies sought to organize the world's information and make it accessible, blah, 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 blah. Yahoo, though, was always about human curation. It started out as having a team of people who are literally professional web surfers, whose job it was to surf the internet and find cool websites and then put it in a hand-curated directory. And so Yahoo, by nature, always saw itself as a media company, an entertainment company. It was about community and hand curation. Google, on the other hand, sought to organize the world's information through algorithms, and it was always about scale. And so that's why Google was very engineering led. Yahoo was more product management led. When I ran design at Yahoo, I reported to the chief product officer. When I was at Google, I chose to report to the chief technology officer, because where you align design, really ultimately you want to align design with where the power is in the organization. So it doesn't matter if you align with engineering or product. Design can be successful anywhere. It really comes down to the person and how effectively are you able to collaborate with people and embrace what is the competitive advantage and how do you exploit that and make that great as part of the experience.
That's great. Thank you. So I know we're at the reported time, so I think we'll let you go. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, Irene. This is super insightful. I know a lot of people enjoyed it, and thanks for spending the time with us.
Sure. Thanks for your time and attention. Good luck to you all.
Best of luck. Bye.
Bye.